Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Quantum Tech. So we're here with the pharma panel, which is always one of the highlights because pharma is seen as one of the near-term use cases for quantum technologies, especially quantum computing. And I'm delighted to have with us Brian Martin, who is Senior Data Scientist and Head of AI and R&D Information Research at AbbVie. Brian really focuses as the head of the newly formed Raiders team within R&D. He's focused on accelerating, scaling, and amplifying the work of AbbVie's R&D community using AI technologies like machine learning, deep learning, and cognitive computing. He's been involved in quantum for quite a while, as I only found out recently. Brian, I would like to hand the floor over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Amit. And thanks everybody for joining us, and thanks to the Quantum Tech folks for bringing us together to talk. It's kind of interesting, as Kam Chana from Merck, who's on our panel, and I were commenting a little prior, this is actually the second Quantum Tech panel that we've both been on around the pharma community. A couple of years ago, pre-COVID, we sat on the same panel with a couple of other colleagues from the industry and had a discussion probably very similar to the one we're going to have today. And I think the answers to the questions, though, were very different then, in many ways, than what we're going to see today. We're also joined by a couple of other colleagues in the industry, Bhushan Bonde from UCB and Xavier Vigouroux from A2S. So I'm going to start actually by letting each of them introduce themselves and give us a little bit of an explanation on how they got into quantum and into the idea of this quantum computing space being a potential possibility for making things happen in the pharma community or in the technology industry as a whole. So Xavier, why don't you talk to us a little bit about yourself and A2S and where you've gotten into quantum from?
Yeah. Thank you, Brian, for the introduction. So yes, so I'm working for Atos, which is an international company for services for digital transformation widely. And they bought a company called Bull a few years ago, which was providing supercomputers. And this company is always at the edge of the computing. So we went from supercomputing and provided the large supercomputer centers around the world. And we are part of the top 500 list, obviously. And then the AI came into the pictures, as we can solve some problems with the AI that we cannot solve numerically. And then came in the picture the quantum as an extension of the technology. So the position of Atos regarding quantum is not to provide hardware, but to provide machine learning. When I say machine learning, I say this is a tool. I would say a tool to train or to prepare the algorithms and to port the algorithm, design the algorithm on the quantum computer that may appear in the future. So we want the customer to be ready as soon as possible to exploit the supercomputer. So we are providing a quantum learning machine which is agnostic. We can simulate. Which can simulate the quantum computer. So I will go further in the next question for sure, but just to mention, we are providing this machine. This is to train and to prepare this appearance of the quantum computer coming in the coming years.
Great, thanks so much. Bhushan, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and UCB and how you got into quantum?
Thanks, Brian there. My name is Bhushan and I head the IT's innovation development for early solutions, so R&D of the UCB Pharma. My focus is on early drug discovery. So before the clinical trial start, designing of identifying of target and the compounds, the right compound, right disease, right targets, etc. So my kind of interactions with quantum around 2 years ago was accidental. When I say accidental, means I really wanted to solve a problem I had in one of my projects. I had been asked to provide a software for solving a linear programming, linear equations. So these are the ordinary differential linear equations, and then we have to solve these equations in parallel, around 1200, in parallel. And then I was looking for some kind of a supercomputing based or Python based solutions of solving this equation in reality and trying to use optimization techniques, mathematical optimization technique. And that's where I kind of bombarded onto quantum. And I said, why can't I do a benchmark with a conventional computer? It took me 3 days to solve these equations in parallel to find the right local versus global minima versus can I try with quantums? And I gave a go with the that time with the help of IBM colleagues, on the IBM Q, and I got a really surprising result, and that kind of enforced my belief in quantum. Until that time, I was one of the skeptical in quantum. I used to consider that as wasting time in doing this kind of computing. But then the next question is where I am today with these is, then I had a student with the collaboration with Oxford University and UCB, and then we tried some benchmarking with doing some optimization problem, including small 3D molecules. I cannot do bigger protein molecules today because of the limit of the quantum bits are available. Maybe in future I can do it, but with the chemistry applications in the quantum, I got some surprising results, and I got some surprising learning using some VQE based computing, noisy VQEs and all. And that's my journey, I guess, until now.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Kam, it's your turn. Tell us about you and Merck and where you've been going.
Sure. So Kam Chana, Merck and Co, but more focusing in the MRL space, our Merck Research Lab. So the R&D space. And so my group is focused primarily around high performance computing in its various forms and shapes, the infrastructure all the way to the algorithms and sort of the applied computing around high performance computing. And so, quantum is obviously one of the tools in our toolbox. Well, for us, it's probably about 6-7 years that we've been looking at quantum computing. And, the conversation of the last 3 to 4 years has really moved from sort of learning and more academic exercises to actually looking at use cases and, really sort of narrowing down on those near-term use cases. And so right now, I would say a lot of our use cases are sort of tending towards optimization problems, which are definitely more near-term for the current state of the art with quantum computing. But, we've also been looking at, fundamental quantum chemistry type problems. I should again thank Quantum Tech for inviting me to this, and definitely interested to hear from everybody on the panel.
Sure. Well, and as Amit said originally, at AbbVie, I head up an AI group within our R&D community, and some people are like, well, why are you doing quantum computing? Like, how does quantum computing tie to AI? And it's probably because AI itself is a bit of a crappy term, maybe. It's become a catch-all bucket for a lot of different things. However, there is obviously direct applications from quantum computing to machine learning, which I know Xavier and the folks at Atos will talk a little bit about specifically. But I think one of the things that has been interesting is how we've structured our team internally for AI work also is how we structure it for quantum computing work, where the scientists who need these capabilities have access to embedded resources. Our data scientists who are doing this work are embedded in those business groups. And through that is how we actually got into our first actual engagement with quantum computing just at the end of this last year. And much come to your point, it was focused on some of the pure chemistry, cheminformatics types of use cases. We looked at, for example, calculating dissociation free energy of peptide bonds between two peptides. So very simple, small toy scale problems. And if we go back 2 years ago, we would have never even been at that point, right? We would have never even been at the point where we could think about calculating something like that, even at that dual peptide scale of calculation. And so it's really amazing for me to think and see about that. And I think the key is we're structuring our businesses around this type of engagement, finding these use cases that matter, or these use cases where there might be potential, and reaching out to the computing and the technology communities to make that happen. So, I mean, Xavier, for you, is that how you currently see companies engaging and structuring with you for your research teams and for interfacing with those business teams?
So, in fact, we can see the both side, the technology side. First, the technology side. So, having some product that will be adaptable for many usage. So this is the technology side. On the other side, we will have some verticals. So the one you named with chemistry, life science, we have many of them. So the question is how you can put the technology in the hands of the customer. So here we have different actions. So the first one is we have a research, we have the R&D which works on that. We have a Life Science Center of Excellence, which is based in Cambridge. So the goal is to focus on the life science for this one, any aspect of the life science. So we're working with pharmas, working for chemistry, working from life science, hospitals, so many use cases there. And the solution for these use cases may be AI, maybe HPC, maybe data lake, and maybe quantum. So then the question is, we must create a link between the R&D on the quantum, on the other side, the life science. So really, we have Natalia, who is on the line, who is based in Cambridge, and she's managing and leading this center of excellence for Life Science Center of Excellence. So for us, this is very important, this center of excellence. And a last aspect which is important is training, and this is what you mentioned. When you have teams, when you have customers with a new technology, how you bring this technology as a productive tool for a user. So we have a huge curriculum of training from very theoretical aspect to end usage. So again, here Sabine is here for answering these kind of questions, but we have to accompany the customer on this journey for these new technologies. This is our philosophy.
Yeah, and you call out the education, which I think is exactly where probably all of us find ourselves trying to both educate ourselves continuously as the things change and improve, as well as our scientist communities to understand the potential and the impact and the possibilities there. Bhushan, do you see that with your folks at UCB? Are you engaging in that type of education? How are they receiving that? How are they latching onto that?
Mute. So.
Yeah, it's a great question, and Xavier already mentioned a few of the points about educations and all. I think for my side, and what I observed in my projects is, one thing is that the technology is really advanced for even for us, as you mentioned, Brian, there, and the technology is growing at a very rapid pace than even AI machine learning. I mean, AI machine learning is in 80s, and the quantum computing really came in last 5 years, and it captured from there being a traditional quantums to today photons, which is came last in the show, but still the whole show now. The photons is really changing the landscape. So for me, the point is in the changing this kind of rapid pace of technology landscape, what we really need to do is remove that kind of technical difficulty for the end users and make it into a simple wrapping in an environment that could be, provide them this safe, let's say safe and trusted environment to solve their problem. So for example, a biological problem in let's say chemical optimization, structural optimization problem, you need to abstract it away so that a computational CAD scientist or even a normal chemistry scientist can understand it in that fashion. So I think that kind of a challenge is what we had been trying to deliver. And then the second thing is to make this technology accessible to the end users without learning all the quantum bits. I mean, they don't need to be a PhD in quantum computing, to use it in the real world. And that's where the challenge lies for me.
Well, and I think that calls out, Kam, I know from your experience, you have a long experience with computation of the non-quantum variety, right? And so do you see, I know I do, but do you see the same sort of blending of quantum computing with classical computing, with AI, machine learning, distributed computing, all of these different modalities of computation? Are you seeing that same sort of hybrid and overlay type approach?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm going to answer your question in sort of three parts here. So the first part is really sort of minimizing or cutting the hype, right? Because just like with AI, there's a lot of hype surrounding this, right? So that's sort of our first step, right? Let's look at the right problems that we can solve with this technology, and it's not going to do everything. Even in sort of 10, 20 years, whenever the general purpose quantum computer arrives, so that's the first part. Then the second part is really, again, looking at how we train our data scientists and our IT folks to help the business teams to, again, to Bhushan's point, not necessarily think about superposition or the fundamental quantum mechanics, but really think about the use case and the algorithm that's appropriate for that use case. And then, the third approach is obviously partnering with industry leaders in this space that can really help us, sort of solve the problems. I was just on another panel where I drew the analogy of my PhD physics supervisor, who said, I'm really bad at mathematics. So what I did was went and hired the best mathematician I could find so I could focus on the physics, right? And that's really the approach that we're sort of taking, where we want to focus on the problems and then bring in the experts to kind of help us solve the problems.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess I think about it, to throw a little bit back, I think about it back to my first 486 Intel computer, where I had, if I wanted to play the game Falcon 3.0, for example, I had to go buy that little math coprocessor and plug it in, because the use case around that game required that you have that math computational capability that coprocessor gave your system to be able to run. And so in that sense, I think the use cases here are focused on the use cases, or where this is going to find value is in the use cases that are going to require that capabilities, those underlying capabilities that can't be unlocked easily at scale through classical computing. And I guess to that end, where do you see, Kam, the biggest potential from the use case perspective? Is it in these chemistry computational areas?
Yeah, so I think, as I mentioned, near term is probably more in the optimization space. Our challenge with, in the sort of life sciences space is that, the simulations, pure quantum chemistry simulations, right now we're not even close to a small drug-like compound. But we're getting there. So maybe in a few years' time we'll be able to simulate drug-like compounds on quantum computers. And so again,
and I'm going to jump in. Small molecules or biologics?
Well, so biologics is probably way off. But yeah, I mean, I think if we can start with small molecules, that'll be a huge advantage. But again, so what we're thinking about here is not necessarily just a simulation of the entire compound, right? So how can we take a approach where we're looking at the fractional, you mentioned this, at a sort of a fraction of the molecule, right? And so how does that enhance some of our classical methods? Do we improve our force fields, or is it part of a machine learning algorithm where, again, the fractional part of the compound is the property there is the important thing, right? So there's kind of, these small steps in this direction where we're bringing in the technology, learning what are the best approaches, etc. I think in the optimization space, it's a little easier, quote unquote easier, because again, the algorithms and the problems here are well understood. Something like the Traven salesman problem. obviously very applicable to supply chain. So we can start thinking about some of these other problems. And then I think finally in the machine learning space, again, this is where I would say for quantum computing, where we were with deep learning maybe 5 years ago, and now today we can build a model that we just present a small string to it and it computes a property for us, or predicts a property for us. So I think as the technology and approaches mature, then soon it will become part of our routine sort of toolkit.
Right. So Xavier, I'm going to take what Kam said and throw a question to you then. So if these use cases, like we said, are focusing in some of the classical computation, and then maybe extending, like Kam said, to supply chain optimization problems like that, leveraging well-known algorithms, right? So take a traveling salesman problem, a matrixed optimization problem like that, solve that. I would ask you two questions. Number one, are you seeing the same sort of focus from the folks that you're engaging with? And number two, since you called out specifically applying quantum to machine learning, and that seems to be farther down the road, is focusing on that area really gonna deliver, do you think, tangible value anytime soon? Or is that leveraging some of the hype from AI to be able to drive momentum, which, to be clear, I don't think is a bad thing. It's just something you do intentionally, if that's the way. Can you clarify maybe why that focus on that quantum ML is something that Atos is looking at?
Yes, this was somehow an example, yes, for sure. And I agree that there is some hype behind this term, but this is a matter of optimization, and this is what has just been mentioned. So the question is how we use the best tool for the optimization, for the best use case. And then if the quantum computing is just a new solution, it will be the best solution, then it will got the market, I would say, to make it simple. So I fully agree with what you mentioned about the AI and deep learning. And so this is the hype curve that we have from Gartner. So everybody is totally happy and enjoying the word AI and try to use that in every places, because this is the hammer they currently have. But for sure there would be a decrease, and they would be used for the right place. So my feeling is that there is always new solution appearing, and quantum is a new solution. There will be some room for that, because there will be clearly situation where it will be much better than the classical solution. And this is the same thing for the AI, and machine learning is also a solution that will solve some problem, natural language processing or image processing, computer vision. These things can be solved very efficiently by AI, but there will be one place for that. So for me, quantum computing is really a new solution, and it will take time. I agree with you. There will be this NISQ era with very noisy qubit that will be here. How we will use them, and how at the end of the journey they will solve real solution. This is still something to build, but we have to go through all these opportunities. They would find their target, and they would be used in the best target the most efficiently. That's my conviction.
So Bhushan, I know we all look to leverage the outside resources as best we can, and whether it's companies like Atos, or whether it's academic partnerships or software or hardware vendors, how are you at UCB engaging outside your community, outside your company, to work with the community, the academic partners, other companies, to invest and engage and educate in this space?
Yeah, it's a good question. Thanks for that. Basically, as you are part of the Q Pharm Q, our accelerator for pharmaceutical industry as a quantum computer, I think we are also part of. I'm part of that as a UCB, as I'm representing there. That's the partnership between the pharma companies to have the future of the quantum computing for pharma. But other than that, we are engaging with academic partners like Oxford University, and trying to collaborate with that. We are also looking at companies including IBM and even Microsoft being trying to look into the partnership there. It's a bit early days today. As I said, what we are at is to explore where the situation is better, fit for us, our internal consumption. And that's where we are also talking at the same other companies like CQCs and all at the moment to see if we can bring it as the example case or something for chemistry use of the quantum computers. But really, what we're really doing is to tap into those early explorations as R&D, because we are all doing R&D at the moment, to see where it actually brings the value. The problem with quantum computing is we really don't know where it could bring a value. I mean, we know at a very high level that it is fit for some kind of algorithms where it needs optimization, for example. But we really don't know where it will bring the real value in the organization, because optimization is used in the hindsight in many applications in many stages, in decision making, from the finances to process optimization for manufacturing to the production to the product supply chains. Everywhere it is used, and that is just one of the example. But even in the R&D organizations, where we have early drug discovery, if you take an example of your instruments which needs some kind of a data churning, when data needs to be fitted properly to the experiments you do. So for example, certain experiments where you need to optimize those experimental values you got it from your carbon-13 label experiments to the findings you get it into the labs. You need to do optimization of the data. You need to identify the fitting, right, data fittings and all. And there, all these optimization products could be really helpful. It might be that we will have a hybrid approach. We might have some kind of optimization going on in a conventional computer and some part going into a quantum computer. And that is where we are trying to really explore where the quantum computer can bring that certain, value into the organization. And really, we are in a stage where both the hardware is accelerating day by day. I mean, really, we had only one example of 50 qubit computer to do a small molecule optimization, 3D optimization. Today we have few companies. We have more than 3 companies providing that hardware. And few cloud providers providing that access to us. And I think this is where we need to keep an eye and maybe explore the applications to the quantum.
Yeah, and you mentioned the QFarm Alliance, right? And so QFarm Alliance was actually started a couple of years ago by Amir Roach from Takeda and Ross Walker from GSK and myself and a couple of others. Kam was there, I think, at the founding when we first sort of said, yeah, we should get together and do this. And I think what's happened over the next couple of years is that's grown. But we're also seeing now that to really engage with the technology side of things, the industry side of things, that's kind of beyond the pale of what these pre-competitive alliances like this are really capable. And so we've joined together with the Pistoia Alliance, which folks may or may not know is an R&D alliance of pharma companies pre-competitively to help in the R&D process side of things around pharma technology and stuff, as well as with the QEDC. And so there's a community of interest that's been started around this. Celia Meersbacher, who's now director of the QEDC, I believe, from SRI, and John Wise and Zahid Taria from the Pistoia Alliance. And we've been working together to drive, hopefully, forward exactly what you're talking about, Bhushan. Some of that community engagement to validate and prove some of the use cases. And that actually gets to one of our first audience questions. A question from the audience: some literature and software have demonstrated quantum algorithms to be used in noisy computers to accelerate energy optimization. I'd like to know the panel's thoughts around it. For example, protein folding or ground state energy calculation. So I'll go first and I'll say we specifically did a proof of concept around dissociation energy calculation for peptide DOMs. And our intention is to actually publish that research once it's cleared of approvals to the entire QFarm Alliance and community so that they can learn from that. And nobody has to do that same exact experiment twice, right? This is the openness of research that we're trying to drive through these alliances. And I think that there's a lot of these use cases that are being looked at around crystalline structure prediction, around some of the other optimizations that I know that Ross from GSK, they're going to be publishing some stuff hopefully sometime soon here, which is really exciting. And there's other groups. I think everybody is doing this right now. Kam, I don't know, is there anything that you guys are allowed to talk about that you're doing, or Bhushan? And then, we'll go there first, and then Xavier, I'll go to you and say, are you guys engaging in any of this type of early research as well? But Kam, what about you first?
Yeah, so
okay. Go on. Sorry, go on.
Yeah. So I mean, I think if you ask any pharma company that's involved in the space, we're probably looking at the same problems, right? So the question about how do we contribute, in a pre-competitive way, and so I mean, this in any technology or approach, early days, this is a challenge, right? We want to contribute because the algorithms themselves, don't necessarily, that's not our competitive advantage, right? But they could be. So, what do you publish? What do you contribute back? And what do you protect, right? And so that's where we kind of draw the balance. It's algorithms that we co-develop, again, with partners, the business for those partners is the algorithm, right? And so the balance is, what do we protect? What do we keep as our secret? Gives us a competitive advantage. And then, how do we also just advance the overall industry? So, particularly with the question around protein folding, ground state energy calculations, again, I think everybody's sort of looking at approaches here and doing, at a small scale, because again, we're not there with the hardware. But we'll learn a lot from that, right? And so again, computing the dissociation energy isn't really a competitive advantage for any of us, right? It's an approach. It's well understood. We need to solve it on a computer.
Yeah. Xavier, what about from your perspective? Have you seen involvement in some of these spaces?
So yeah, I would try to structure my mind. Okay, so because the question is very, very large. So first of all, we don't know what technology will be the winner in the coming years. So when we will design a quantum algorithm, the question is on which noisy quantum computer it will fit. So this is why we have this quantum learning machine, QLM. I will use the QLM, because this simulator can emulate or simulate any kind of QPU, and then we can look at the noise signal ratio and what we obtain somehow from the different QPU and say this QPU is the best one for this problem, whatever the problem we name. So this is the first point. So when I say there is no winner at this stage, and we don't know what is the technology, we have chosen a very agnostic solution, very open solution. I'm close to you, Brian, on that point, and I really understand that some things must be protected and some others may be open. So we are trying to put many different people, use cases. So I can name AstraZeneca, I can name people from SEFGA in Europe working on the breast cancer or the quantum rule-based systems. So we are working with them very openly, with Bayer, etc. So then we are trying to put them together and to say, look at the different solutions you may face in the future. Even if they are noisy, even if they are not perfect, here is the solution you may face. And then work with us, and we will try to port your problem on this quantum learning machine, and we will point out which solution is the best one for you. And again, there is a final point, sorry to be long for this one. The way we measure the efficiency or the quality of the QPU today is not perfect. Everybody is saying, yes, we have hundreds of qubit, or we can say anything. So this is why we have launched again what we are calling a Q score, and the Q score is relying on the max cut problem, but on the graph problem. The question is, for a QPU, what is the size of the graph that can be solved by this QPU? with a probability that the result is the good one. So notion of probability of the result. This QPU is much better and is focusing on the problem, how it solves the problem. It is not a matter of size, it is a matter of how it solves the problems. Again, it is open, everybody can use this Q score.
Yeah,
that's fine.
So I think your Q score, and if we go back to this concept of quantum volume that IBM brought out and qubits, they're all arbitrary in a certain way. But ultimately, I think what we need to do is we need to learn from the video game industry, of any industry to learn about benchmarking from. I think we need to look at the video game market, because when you look at a benchmark of a video game or a video card for a video game, right? They don't just show you, oh, here's the frames per second that we were able to achieve. They show you in like 5 different games under different circumstances, right? And so we need to take a page from that model when we're comparing, because there are problems where a D-Wave, a neat quantum annealer, which is not even a gate-style quantum computing, will well exceed what any type of gate quantum computer can do right now. And there are problems where even a 14-gate, IBM Q is going to, in theory, exceed a 5,000 qubit D-Wave advantage. It's a nature of the problem and mapping the problem to the underlying hardware and the way it works in that system that is going to have to drive our benchmarking. And so I encourage the industry to come up with a model that lets me as a consumer say, my problem looks like X. And the benchmarks say, this is the quantum computing approach I should be looking at to solve a problem that looks like X. That's going to put a lot more meaningful information into the hands of folks like Kam and Bhushan and myself, who are in this position of, if we want to solve this type of problem, what's the right way forward? What's the right way to engage? And that leads actually to another audience question here that John Martinez suggested earlier, that actually NIST machines can be seen as a testing ground to prepare for the future and iron out issues, et cetera, rather than actual business benefits. Panel thoughts. Kam, what do you think?
Yeah, I totally agree. So, to your point about the benchmarks, right? I mean, we're not quite there where we've got one approach to quantum computing in the hardware, right? So, or even in some of the algorithms, right? So I think
we might never have just one approach, right?
Exactly, right? So I think, this sort of ties into the question that's been asked, right? It's what do we learn today with the current state, right? And, we can apply at the small scale. And obviously, as the hardware continues to improve or grow, we know we'll be able to scale up, right? I mean, this is the same problem, in classical computing. 20 years ago, the kind of problems that we solve today would have, been impossible, right? The hardware is always going to continue growing, but in some respects, what we learned 20 years ago in quantum chemistry, we're applying it today, right? We're still applying those fundamental algorithms approaches.
Yeah, Bhushan, what do you think? Do you agree with John Martinez?
Yeah, I think I'm quite agree with what is said there, because we are at the moment actually really trying to reproduce with the conventional computer benchmarking with the quantum computing. So it is really early stage. What it is giving us is a confidence on the problem that we need to solve, whether it is right or wrong, and whether it is approaching right. And one of the question also leads to my experience in sometimes, when we say, let's apply the well-known problem of optimization, which is very well fit for quantum computers. Sometimes it's really difficult to get. There is something called, when we use VQ Asante, a real assumption state right. And one of my problem is getting that Asantes right is really difficult, because the way the abstraction has to be done in a real problem to the quantum computer is not always right. And I think that is where that tells us that something is wrong in the real assumptions as well. So it just reiterates to our belief first in what we know, or what we are kind of know about the systems. And if the systems we don't know about, a lot of things are assumed in binary computing, then that's something we need to reiterate. So I totally agree with what has been suggested there already on the NISQ machines.
Yeah, and I would say, I don't know that I would write off delivering value from NISC era machines completely. I think the key is how you approach engaging with it, right? If you imagine that you have a larger scale problem that you can bring classical and NISC-based computation to, and one part of that problem is appropriate and scaled and fits and is solvable in a more optimal way with that NISC-based computation, I think it's possible you might find a way to deliver value leveraging that. I don't think we've identified that yet. I don't think we've seen the problem that's laid out that when you combine classical approach S, X with the limited scale of a NISC-based approach, Y, you deliver value. That would be very interesting. And I think that somebody showing that is going to be one of those sort of next dominoes, if you will, in the sequence of getting investment from pharma in the space. And I think you also have to differentiate the value question, delivering value question, from the NISC-based versus non-NISC-based, or non-NISC versus non-gate-based. Because I do think that the D-Wave folks have shown, whether you believe it's quantum computing or not that is happening in a D-Wave, that what it is doing, if you consider it one way or another, is able to deliver value. At the new, the D-Wave Advantage can deliver value in certain scale problems. And so, again, it's still that co-processor kind of approach, though. It's not the thing and the whole of the thing. It's how it sits as part of these larger systems. A question from the audience concerning the benchmarking ideas. Is there a potential set of applications typical for pharma that would be the base for benchmarking a quantum computer? Perhaps like you would benchmark a set of applications on a classical computer today. I think that answer is yes, absolutely. We could take the entire list of use cases that have been thrown forward for quantum computing and say, if you can do this with a quantum computer, comparing it to a classical computer, then you can demonstrate the value. And so what I would say is the interesting space there for a benchmark would be not a benchmark of pure isolated performance, but a benchmark of comparison against the classical. So if the quantum equivalent is 0.45 of the classical baseline, then you're not delivering value yet. But if you're at 1.3 of the classical baseline, or 1.2, that's a metric that I can go in and I can do computation on myself and say, if I'm spending X million dollars to do this problem classically, and I can get a 15% improvement, what is the cost implications there? I can start to develop a business case around that. So I would say absolutely some sort of benchmarks taking these same use cases as a classical set and comparing the quantum equivalent. And your challenges is two dimensions, right? There's time and there's scale. And so it's one thing to be able to execute that problem at the same scale as a classical system. And then there's the how much time it takes. And there's a third dimension that we absolutely need to start considering, which is the energy, the green factor here, right? Because if it takes me 1,000 nodes of a cluster computer to solve this in 20 minutes, and it takes me one quantum computer that is consuming 100th or 1,000th of the electrical consumption, like there's a green factor that needs to start coming into our conversations here as well, because it's not just about the output, it's about the input as well. And there's no real talk right now at all, I think, in the quantum community about whether this has the potential to have that green impact or have an impact in that green metric or green dimension of calculation. There's another audience question. Is there a grand challenge in pharma that can focus the quantum industry? It's a great question. I don't know that there is one grand challenge. I would say that there are a ton of grand challenges, right? There are a ton of these opportunities to solve these problems. Now, what would be a grand challenge within pharma, I think would depend on different people and different problems that they face. ultimately, the grand challenge is if you can deliver, and this is my opinion, if you can deliver a computational ability that gets a safer medicine, a safer therapeutic, or a safer cure into a patient faster, with a lower effort, and with less error than the current process, that's the grand challenge. And every one of these use cases we talk about is focused on that. Kam or Bhushan, Kam, would you agree? Do you disagree? Is there a grand challenge other than the patient that you think we can engage with?
Well, yes, I agree. I think that there are multiple grand challenges here, right? I mean, you know, again, way back when we think about prodding folding as being, you know, the grand challenge, right? So I think things will fall out, right? But just kind of going back to the previous discussion around application. So again, I agree there that, you know, where we are today, really we have to sort of focus on not the metric of, okay, we're now getting a increase in performance similar to, you know, what we get with the cloud, right? We can grow our cluster to whatever size we want, right? I don't think that's a real metric, right? What we should be looking at is, what are those problems that we cannot solve today on a classical system, right? And yes, we may not be able to solve those at scale on a quantum computer, but, you know, that's what's going to inform us as to where the quantum computer fits in. And you know, some of this is the hype that, you know, it's a new technology, it shows a lot of promise, but I still think, you know, we're still a ways away from when we realize that you know, sort of broad application of a quantum computer. So we have to, you know, again, focus as an industry on, you know, these are the algorithms, these are the problems that these algorithms solve today. And so through that, you know, maybe there'll be some grand challenges. So, you know, I don't know, free engineer binding calculations, you know, things like that really require huge amount of resource and approaches. You know, that may be a grand challenge.
Yeah, Bhushan?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, but when I had to to give the similar answer to one of my leadership in UCB, one thing I remember is all these bacteria, you know, the microbes in the real life, they had been solving all the problems of optimizing their pathways inside the small, you know, smallest amount. And they had been doing this very efficiently over the many years, you know, over the evolution. They had been solving this problem right way. And so if we need to think what, and I had been a PhD in systems biology, I had spent my whole research in trying to even optimize one single pathway using ordinary differential equations and partial differential equation. And I couldn't get it right, you know, believe me. But then the question comes in the same analogy is, what kind of computers these bacteria have to solve this in very right that we couldn't do it in conventional computers. And I think that the real analogy is there. They have to have this quantum, let's say, biological processes that has been getting it right over the evolution. And so even if we can mimic those processes in real life, where pharma industries then can deliver these bases based on those calculations very rightly you said, Martin and Kam there, that could be accelerate the piece of drug discovery. I think that is the grand challenge for me.
Yeah. So Xavier, having listened now to the three of us talk about the challenges and the grand challenges and the use cases, how do you, as a technology and an industry participant here, how do you think about your roadmap? In thinking about this, how do you think about setting out the roadmap for your company and for your technology in a way to support what you've just heard us talking through?
So again, we are an integrator. So we are integrating technology from others. So we plan to have a QPU on our roadmap in 2023. This is the target currently. So obviously we have all the hypotheses that we talked about the noisy, this Niskera. So for me, this will be the first step as your coprocessor, as your V20. I don't know which coprocessor it was, but this is this notion of coprocessor that we could have. If you remember the early age of the GPU were beside the HPC. There was some nodes with GPU on the side of the HPC or the supercomputer. There was some remote access sometimes for some kind of RDMA access to this to the GPU, and they were beside. And then they somehow the GPU entered in the supercomputer. I think for the roadmap, it will be the same thing. We will have some supercomputer with some QPU on their side, and the goal is how we can exploit them to build something, to bootstrap something, and to leverage from that. So this is the approach I was dealing with. I talked about, so very agnostic about what would be the solution, to be sure that we open the world for the user, and then trying to simulate any QPU. So when you are on the machine, you will rely on the good QPU that you will have access to. And again, as an end-to-end solution, we want to integrate this QPU in our roadmap, and we are going up to the center of excellence I mentioned at the beginning, and the training and all that aspect.
So when you hear us talk, though, about different use cases that might leverage different frameworks and technologies in it, right? So one solution might work better with an annealer, while another one requires gate computing. How do you think about a roadmap for your company from that integration standpoint, when we might have 3 different problems that require 3 different types of integration?
So you get into my background, which is benchmark. So I was committing figures for the customer. They had their own problems, and we have to provide the best machine for them. So they provide the use case, and we have to provide the best solution. And if you go back in the early the years 2000s, then there was only one solution, which was one x86 solution, and everybody has to fit with that. And now, if you look at the numbers of solutions between NVIDIA, AMD, ARM, with Fujitsu solution, all these coprocessors, interconnect, memory, etc. There is a very large set of solutions. So the question is how you select the best solution for the use case provided. And I fully agree, there will be never one solution solving all the problems, I'm for sure. And this is why we have to understand the customer, center of excellence I mentioned, and we have to do this link between these very hard technologies, which is quantum, how you make it usable, how you remove the complexity of this technology for users to just use that as any tool. This is our goal.
So with that type of integration project in mind, how do you find and train the people? How do you find and train the talent that's necessary to do that type of integration work, to understand the technology and the customer need and be able to bridge that gap?
So again, this is a matter of creating an ecosystem of people with different skills. So we are liaising with some universities around the world with different skills, very theoretical people on one side, and also people providing technologies and really technologies, hardware on the other side. So the goal is to build a full curriculum, and we have one guy in the team really working hard on that to have the largest spectrum of solutions. So, and there is also two points. First, you have to train people as an initial formation, initial training. So for the students, for the masters, something like that, and also for companies, how you train the talents that are already working on that technology. So you cannot spend 6 months training these guys. So the goal is to provide them with a limited scope, okay, focusing on a limited scope. And again, we want to bring something with an ecosystem. We don't have the solution on our own. Everybody, the community, has the solution.
So I'm going to tie into that before I go to Kam and Bhushan about the talent question, just because I have to ask. So as an integrator, does Amazon Bracket and the like help or hurt your efforts to bring technology to bridge that? Because if you've got that intermediary that is giving access to a single customer endpoint to now have multiple hardware, multiple different solutions in that framework. Does that help or hurt you in those integration efforts?
I will have two answers, okay? Two parts. The first thing is what I'm calling co-opetition. It's not competition, it's not cooperation, it's co-opetition. So this is case by case. Sometimes AWS is a very good solution for some problems, and then if it's the best solution for the customer, let's provide that. So this is the first. And the second thing for me is that we still we will always have some specific solution for on-premise. Even if Amazon exists, we will have people using on-premise solutions. So the question is not how is it in competition. So it's how we can do something, a continuum between on-premise solution and cloud solution as HPC today, with on-premise HPC and HPC as a service on the other side, and make it usable and productive for the customer.
Well,
co-opetition.
Co-opetition. Okay? Co-opetition. All right, it's a word of the day now. You know, and I would say that the idea of on-premise quantum computing for most industries is probably a non-starter in many ways, just because of the infrastructure. For pharma, it might not be as big of a leap, right? We're not as the idea of running liquid nitrogen into a building, or having liquid helium be a resource that's available, having larger power supplies. Like, we have labs that have that stuff now, and so it might not be as far away theoretically to install a quantum computer in a lab at a pharma research facility as it would be in many, think finance industry maybe, or places like that. But I still see that the cloud resource for this is the only way that this is going to start. I don't see, you know, and Kam or Bhushan can correct me if I'm wrong, and others maybe, but I don't see AbbVie going out and buying a $10 million plus quantum computer to install in a lab unless I can deliver more than $10 million of value back, right? So this is where the use case and the validation really drives, I think, the hardware. We've got just a couple minutes left here before we got to end up the session. Kam or Bhushan, anything you want to say about the talent question? Because I know for us, it's not something we're actively going out there and seeking at this point.
Yeah, same here. So, you know, the way we're kind of addressing this is that, you know, we have data scientists that understand our domain space and how to apply data science to problems, right? So it's really, we're thinking about how do we train those folks within the group rather than go and find people. You know, you know, again, 5 years from now, it may be a different situation. I may be hiring somebody that's come out of a degree that's, you know, applied quantum computing. But yeah, and again, you know, it's you know, I want to focus on the physics, not the mathematics, and that's really where we are, right? We have people that have way better experience and knowledge around the mathematics than we do, right? But we bring the domain expertise to the challenge.
Bhushan.
Yeah. For me, what data science has been doing for AI ML, if you see last 10 years, the data science as a profession has been providing that fuel to the AI ML applications and their popularities. I think that kind of, you know, some kind of a semi-profession need to come up from the university levels to take the need for transition, kind of, you know, converting the domain expertise of quantum into the applicability layer for the various businesses. It doesn't matter then whether it is pharma, chemical engineering, to aerospace engineering, to finance industries, to Bitcoin, to security, or some kind of thing. But that layer of the professional, maybe some kind of a pseudo data science layer will form in this area and soon, and that could provide that gap which is there today. But for now, yes, we have to rely on the local university talents or local or maybe let's say expert industry providers, which then fits between your quantum hardware supplier and the pharma industry and provides that gap. You know, could be Atos, could be, you know, CQC, could be Rigetti, could be, you know, these are the companies which provide that gap.
I absolutely agree, and I think we see the technology side of that ecosystem, the Zapatas, the CQCs, companies like that are filling that gap now to bridge from the technology to the data problems and the data science, and doing a great job, I should say, every engagement that we have. We're going to finish up here. And actually, I'll throw out real quick, we have seen some pharma companies invest postdoc positions, supporting academic programs around that, which is awesome. That's a lot of forethought and a lot of foresight on the leaders of those companies to invest in that way. So kudos to them for finding that ability to do that. With that, I think I'll finish and close us out here. Xavier from Atos and Bhushan from UCB and Kam from Merck and Company, I just want to thank you for joining us on this panel. Amit, thank you for inviting us and giving us the opportunity to speak and share with the community. I encourage the community to reach out with questions and comments to any of us and to the organizers here directly. And with that, I'll say goodbye and have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.